Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're going to give people another minute or so to come in. It's nice to see you. All right, we are on top of the hour, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today. I'm Diane Ruiz here at Medtech Innovator. I am the director of the US program, and welcome you all to Medtech Innovator Live number 12. I will, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you all today. This is Medtech Innovator Live number 12, our series of weekly webinars that we do as part of the Accelerator program that runs for the 4 months as an opportunity for our 88 companies across the 3 cohorts to learn from experts all across the ecosystem. And so today, what we're doing, and so for those of you joining us on the live stream, Medtech Innovator is the largest accelerator of medical devices in the world, and it's a downstream accelerator, which means that we're not looking for people with ideas, but people with companies that are up and running, people that have teams and prototypes and early evidence that the technology works. And then we partner with them and partner them with experts. We also, so it's really across the 3 cohorts that we have running. The BioTools cohort, the Asia Pacific cohort just concluded with a big event, you might have seen it, and the US cohort. And so we generally open our webinars to the broader ecosystem beyond the cohort. So if you're on the live stream, feel free to enter your questions in the chat, that is in the YouTube chat or in the LinkedIn chat that you're seeing. We'll try to get to those questions in the hour. Cohort companies, feel free to add your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get those. And I would like to ask our panelists to stay on after the hour for private Q&A with the cohort companies. So with that, I would like to ask our speakers to introduce themselves. We have a great panel today to talk about marketing and PR and branding, things that you might originally think, oh, but I have a brilliant device. Everybody will recognize immediately how wonderful it is, and it should be just easy to get the attention that it needs in the world. But practically, that's not always so. And this webinar specifically came directly out of questions we've heard from our companies. How do we get that attention from investors? How do we get that attention from potential clients? How do we make that happen? And so with that, I am thrilled to have a really knowledgeable panel about all of these aspects with me today. And I will ask our panelists to introduce themselves and their work to you today, and then jump into questions. With that, I will start by asking Laura to tell us about herself and Paganza Health.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Nobles. I'm the CEO of Pazanga Health Communications, and we're a full-service marketing and PR agency focused exclusively in healthcare with a lot of experience in medtech with both startups and established companies. And I have a background in technology, primarily worked in that until the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, and that's when I got into healthcare. And I've never looked back. I love healthcare. I love medtech. I was at the summit. Some of you may have met me, and just was thrilled to hear about all of your companies. And we're an in-kind partner to Medtech Innovator this year, and are thrilled to be part of the program.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Nick, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Nick Pachuta, surgeon by training. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Peptologics, which is a clinical stage biotech startup. Along the way, I've worked in 3 successful startups as well as 3 large multinationals. The longest, most recent stint was at Johnson & Johnson, leading med device external innovation. I also am a venture investor at Mountain State Capital, which is a seed investment fund, and through that sit on a bunch of boards. Great to meet everybody.
Fantastic. Let me call up Bill Lippincott.
My name is Bill Lippincott. I'm with Leaderboard Branding, and Leaderboard Branding is a global naming and branding consultancy and primarily focused on medical device, medical technology, pharma and the biopharma industries. Our services include brand strategy, brand research, visual branding, but primarily at the center of everything we do is naming. What do we call this new product, service, technology, or company? Nice to be here. Oh, well, I've been in the industry for 20 years now and have had the fortune to have led projects with clients ranging from Hershey to IBM to Boston Scientific to AstraZeneca.
Fantastic. Really appreciate that introduction. And last, certainly not least, Kelly Castellano, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work?
Yes, yeah, I'm Kelly. It's great to be here. Thank you. I've been in healthcare technology marketing and from a B2B perspective my entire career. And I've worked for different companies in leadership roles and then started off as, a marketing coordinator. So sort of seen it all from a marketing perspective in that way. But have worked at two healthcare startups, scaled them. They were both very high growth, hyper growth companies. So I've seen what that looks like. And also worked at public companies and Fortune 500 companies. But sort of my roots are in healthcare technology, marketing, and digital health. And I'm really happy to be here and talk with you about it.
That's fantastic. Really appreciate all of you being here. And what I would say, what you can see is that we have a panel that represents different views on marketing and PR on healthcare. Really, it's the operator view, it's the investor view, it's all of those. And with that comes the different goals and targets that communication and storytelling actually has. When we think about, and I said that a little bit in the introduction, when we think about what are the goals, I can think of a bunch of different constituencies that we actually want to talk to. We already mentioned investors. We sometimes are looking to recruit patients for clinical trials. We're talking about potential customers, and who the customer is in the biomedical field is already sometimes challenging to identify. So I'd like to just start by asking all of you, is there even a possibility for a unified message when we're targeting so many different constituencies? Perhaps I'll start with Laura, given that I introduced you first. Is
Sure.
there a way to have a unified message, or isn't there?
Yeah, there's absolutely a way, and it's sort of a must do because you have to have your 30-second pitch. There's the problem you're all of the companies are solving. You want to identify what the problem is and how you're solving it uniquely. And that's an overarching message to everyone. So think of it like an inverted pyramid, where that's sort of your blanket story, of blanket narrative. And then there are certainly messages that you drill in by audience, because the different audiences might care about different things. So it's absolutely doable, and I think essential.
Kelly, you've been in the trenches of actually crafting that message. Would you agree? Or
yes.
do you have
Yeah,
examples
so
of the
me-
contrary?
Yeah, I know. I wish I could disagree because it would be so, exciting. But I got to agree with Laura, though. I mean, that's sort of the foundation that, as a CMO, when I've gone into, these companies and really scaled marketing, you can do that much more easily internally. You have your internal markets with investors and with your target market, if you really have that foundational messaging laid out and your differentiators, what makes you different, what is it that you deliver, and how do you prove that you're delivering it? So I think those are key. Those are the foundation, and from my experience, that have just made scaling much easier if you can nail that down, and just know that you're going to have to tweak it along the way. It's never perfect. It's never quite done, but I think you just have to keep communicating that out to all the different audiences.
I'd like to open it to Bill and Nick, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, for leaderboard branding, where we're getting involved in is that beginning core brand that Laura and Kelly, will take and run with. So for us, we began that process of developing a unified message with basic brand positioning. So academically, you'd say, what is the target audience? What is the unmet need? What is the unique way you fulfill that need? And what are your proof points? But really, branding is, that piece of real estate that you own in your customer's mind, how they go about thinking about you. So that's a functional brand positioning. Brand positioning tends to be, at least in our world, inwardly focused. The messaging is where you turn it into outwardly focused. So the messages need to all run from that core brand positioning, but each one of your target audiences, whether it be investors, employees, patients, doctors, they all have slightly different needs, slightly different wants, unmet needs. And so the messaging is your way of, with a unified voice, communicating to them in a meaningful way what your brand positioning is. And what Laura and Kelly do would be taking that and running with it and filling it out, in all the different ways that you might communicate.
Yeah, maybe I'd jump on the back of that in that, it doesn't matter what stage you're at. You need to have a story. You need to be effectively telling that story, and you don't need to be everything to everybody all the time. But from the day you decide you're going to create a product that someday may make it to market, and you're going to create a company, you're going to need to raise money. You're going to need other people to help you, either internally or externally. At some point, you're going to need to deal with patients or customers. And ultimately, if you want to get an exit or a partner, you're going to need to be able to deal with strategics. So it doesn't matter what stage you're at, you need to have that story, and don't overthink it. But as Bill just alluded to, you better very quickly be able to say, this is a big problem. We have the best solution. It's differentiated from everybody else because of X, Y, and Z. Here's our path forward. We have great people, and here's how much money I need and what we're going to do with it. Maybe bits and pieces of that, depending on who you're talking to. But those 4 or 5 components, and it could be an elevator pitch of 30 seconds or a full-on management presentation, website, the whole 9 yards. You better be able to articulate those key things early and consistently.
I appreciate that. And perhaps to stay on brand for a little bit, just because that's very often the beginning. Bill, you're with Leaderboard Branding. The word branding is already in the name. When is it too early to think about brand? Or perhaps, is it ever too late to think about brand?
Well, I think there'd be a pretty good argument to say it's never too early to start your branding. If you're going to market something, you need to start thinking about the branding. Now, I have had clients who have said, gee, I need to get a little bit further along with my clinical trial. I need to do a little bit more of my product development before I know exactly what kind of claims I'm going to make. But that still doesn't mean that you can't start thinking about who you're going to be marketing this to and what's the problem that you're going to be solving, and those fundamental things. As far as when is it too late? When you've run out of money and you're going out of business because you didn't do it right the first time, that's the only time it's ever too late, because you're always adjusting your brand. Companies spend millions and millions finally tuning their brands throughout every quarter of every year.
I appreciate that. And perhaps to broaden the branding discussion to the entire panel, we ask our companies what they'd like to learn about. And one of the questions that came back is branding important for medical devices? We're presumably evaluated on evidence, not emotion. And so that's a question for everybody. Does branding actually matter? And if so, how? Would you have an example of a company or something like that? Or does, where does evidence versus emotion play into branding?
I guess I would say evidence doesn't matter if no one knows who you are.
Yeah, that's a very well put, Laura. It's so true. I mean, if you don't know your audience well enough to speak to what they care about, then it's hard to get their attention. for them to even look at the evidence. And so I think that's such an important point to make. And branding's about also, how do you want them to feel? You may not be the only game in town with that particular device. And so how do you distinguish yourself? Is it through the service you provide? How do people think about your company when they hear the name? And those are all feed into branding, and they're important, I think, regardless of whatever, industry you're in or category you're in.
Yeah, Warren Buffett says he only invests in things he can understand. A partner may not thoroughly understand your science, your technology. What they're really going to buy into early on is you. Do you have a coherent story? Do you have a brand and a direction? And are you believable and credible? And the people you work with, do they make you more credible? So to me, they're going to invest in you, and then they're going to look at everything else. You and your brand have to get in the door. Your science, your data, and your plan to bring a product to market gets it across the finish line. But don't ever forget any step of the way. It's about you, your message, and your story before they look at anything else.
Yeah, and at the heart of any good,
Sorry.
I was just going to say, at the heart of all good branding, there's an emotional component, right? It's not just what does it do and what's the problem it solves, but how does it make your customers feel? And especially with medical device, you might think that, it makes the patient get better. Well, the patient might feel relief, or the patient might feel excitement or joy. But even with surgeons, you might want make sure that your product is your branding is communicating that it lets them have control over a procedure, or it gives them confidence in the outcome. So these are emotional components that typically you want to have as a part of your branding, even at the product level, even with very functional products.
I'd say that particularly in healthcare too, because we're not selling shampoo. It's a much different, which I've done, and I'm afraid to admit that. I was back in when I was stupid, but no, I'm kidding. It's very boring. But I love this work just because, and it sounds trite, but I mean, we are literally, all of us on this call, helping patients with their quality of life, developing breakthroughs, saving lives, all of those things. And all of us are human beings that consume healthcare. And I think all of us can relate to the impact we're having personally on people. And I think that's just fundamentally an emotional component.
I'd like to build on something that is between something that Nick just said and what you just said, Laura, and that is personal branding. That's something that we haven't really talked very much about, but especially in the very early stages of a company, does that matter? And if so, have you seen founders or CEOs really execute well on how to present themselves as well as their company? I can think of examples in pop culture of personal branding, but there's only very few examples I can think of in the biomedical field. I'd be curious to hear if something comes to mind, and if not, this is me going off on a tangent between Laura talking about shampoo and Nick talking about people telling a convincing story. And so it's the branding of me as an individual, as a founder, especially if I'm a small team, and my company branding. Any feedback there for the companies?
Maybe I'll jump in. If you're not credible and your team's not credible, your goal, your passion, and why are you doing this? Not just as a job, but it's the most passionate thing you've got to get across the finish line, because you're going to change the lives of patients. And you're going to do that, at some, global scale, hopefully someday. If you're not credible and your team's not credible, they're never going to get to the slide on data. They're never going to get to the slide on your pathway and when you're going to launch the product in X, Y, and Z. Your brand and your company's brand and how that leads to people ties into why they're going to ever listen to the rest. So are you on the radar screen? Are you telling a good story? Is it consistent from what they heard the last time, or you are a chameleon switching left and right? I think the people and the brand are the most important to allow you to have the conversation about all those other things?
I think you're a really great person to talk about that, Nick, just because, when you're seeing these personal pitches, you've probably seen all kinds of personal branding,
Mhm.
which I agree is really important.
So, but to come back to companies, we all, a lot of startups are really resource constrained. And so questions that we get a lot is, can you think about a very lean and effective way to build brand awareness, especially for companies that are pre-commercial, that are still in trials? How do we talk about brand awareness for folks who are not yet selling products?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with that one because we do a lot of work with pre-commercial companies. One of the things that we do is obviously start out and make sure the story is really solid. I think that all of us would agree with that. We've been talking about that because you can, do all the tactics you want, but if your story is not solid and differentiated, then it's not going to resonate. But I think, particularly from a PR perspective, it's not a big time to do advertising and things like that, obviously, when you're in your pre-commercial, but you're all achieving milestones, presumably, with your clinical trials or patents or things like that, where you can start, sending those messages to the market of your milestones and who you are and building anticipation. You can also start seeding the market about the problem you're going to solve, kind of raising that to the fore in the discussion. So, I know I'm a little self-serving saying this because I run a PR agency, but I think that that's a very cost-effective way, earned media, to get out there. There are certainly other things, or social media, things like that. Also aligning with key opinion leaders who can start speaking about your story, for you, and that they're obviously very credible as third-party people. So that's just kind of a highlight, I think, of how, you could think about lean PR and marketing.
Yeah, I also think that pre-commercial is a great time. Pre-commercialization is really a great time to get out there and do as much research about your audience as possible, so that you're spreading the word at the same time, but you really are hitting the key messages that are going to resonate versus what you think. And so that's a great time to really get a lot of research done in those early days. So every message you send out there is that much more impactful.
One of the things that we've seen for years are pharmaceutical companies branding their clinical trials, but now we're seeing more and more medical device and even diagnostics companies that are branding their trials because it's a great way to get publicity and start building your overall corporate brand way upstream when you're still in phase 1 or whatever.
And perhaps, how does that change over time through the life cycle of a company? So, you're pre-commercial, you're recruiting patients. Now, maybe you've gotten FDA approval. You are going to market. How does your communication strategy change in that circumstance, or how should it change?
Yeah, I mean, you've got various stakeholders at different times, but if you think about the evolution of a company from ideation to then technical proof of concept, you've got IP data, prototype, you've done something, to then, preclinical or clinical de-risking, preclinical or clinical proof of concept, then your regulatory story, and then finally, how are you ramping up to commercialization? Each step of the way, it's going to be a different set of stakeholders, but a consistent message along the way that, as I think Kelly said, it is tweaked and it is evergreen. However, you don't want to take radical pivots too often. But yes, I always think about the de-risking with the venture hat on of ideation, a technical proof of concept, a clinical or preclinical proof of concept, your regulatory proof, and then ultimately your commercial proof of concept. And I think of company development in those phases, and then the messaging to me follows given what you're doing in those phases.
Yeah, I think that makes this market so unique from others, is that you have all those phases and you can leverage each phase to tell your brand story. So that's unique about this market, where you have all those, those steps before you really start to commercialize.
Absolutely. And I what we've observed, over the years, obviously, when you're launching a product, There are going to be those early adopters who really, sign on. And then there's going to be those who, wait to see, when the dust settles, how is this working? So, at that initial launch, signing up those early adopters to really kind of spread the message for you is really important. And I think, once you've gotten that validation, then it's about growth. And, how you communicate about your company is going to depend on sort of where you are in the evolution. So do you have one product? Are you acquiring a company? Are you establishing a new division? Does that still fit with the mission that you set out to achieve? Like, I'm just thinking Kelly Viz with its platform, maybe you can talk a little bit about how it grew from a clinical product to now, life sciences, and how really, in my opinion, it's really still all about getting the patient treated quicker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all about, getting life-saving treatments to market as fast as possible. But yes, and I think that's, the world is evolving in devices. I work in software as a medical device. And so that's a little bit of a different angle, but really understanding that how that entire healthcare ecosystem, from hospitals to patients to clinics to the devices they use and the pharmaceuticals that they use with patients and treatments is really important. And they're all interconnected. And that's how, Viz was really able to bridge that gap with and create this whole sort of closed loop for the healthcare ecosystem. But I think also those early KOLs, and I think that's what you're talking about, Laura, those early adopters, I think they feed into your brand, going back to brand again. The KOLs that you choose, the key opinion leaders, the early adopters that will help you tell your story. It's important to choose those that fit your brand and can tell your story in a credible way to the people that you're looking to target.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps to stay on the partners, on the key opinion leaders, how do we choose whether to, and assuming that we can, whether to go directly to consumer, to target more clinics, to target key opinion leaders? How do we choose our communication strategy, and especially how do we choose our allies? And the obvious answer is it depends. It depends very much on the type of device or software that you're delivering. So, this specifically, I think the question is, what are the pros and cons of trying to go directly to the consumer when you can, versus going through trusted key opinion leaders, and potentially, how do we even choose those?
I think, you think about going direct to consumer, and depending on what your device does and how it's being used and how much it costs, it's going to, probably venture on an expensive endeavor. The other piece too is that, it really depends by device, right? Because, a consumer is not going to buy a drug-eluting stent or, a piece of AI software to find their stroke faster.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go with it, Laura, but I didn't want to answer, take the question.
No, it's true.
But it really depends on who is buying your product.
Right.
Who is the ultimate buyer group too. You may need different kind of KOLs. You may need administrator type KOLs. You may need clinician, physicians types. It depends who's making those buying decisions in the organization that you're targeting. Is it a commercial team? Is it, what clinical team is making these decisions? That's how I would choose my KOLs, and then make sure they have the same values you have as a company, and your brand values, they would fit in with your culture and the company, to make sure that, they really are a voice for you that is helpful for both of you and the patient at the end of the day, really.
That ties into a question that just came in through our LinkedIn channel, and that is, having a very experienced team or having really great key opinion leaders on your board. What's the best way to actually highlight those folks? How do you highlight your team? How do you highlight your key opinion leaders in your pitch? Is it their faces on a slide? How do I make that case? Nick, I can see you've got an answer there.
A bit on that one. Most people don't highlight all of the great people that add credibility to the company. Most slide decks I see are filled with clinical problem, the science, the tech, the data, the IP, all about what it is and how you're doing this thing. Oh, and by the way, at the end, here's a couple of people that are running the company, and then the end, right? There's three groups of people that have to be highlighted because it's all about adding credibility to your company. You have a problem, you've got value creation for various stakeholders potentially, but what adds credibility along the way, aside from the nuts and bolts of what you're doing, who is on your leadership team and why, not just their face and a title, but the logo of where they have worked and delivered success in the past. Why did you choose those people, and why are they credible? Who's on your board? Why did you choose them? Did they just write you a check, or are they actually just helping you move forward? And again, face where they've delivered success in the past. And then who are your key advisors, clinical advisors, business advisors? And again, face logos of where they've been and why did you pick them, and how are they going to help you add credibility? Those three slides aren't about we hired a bunch of people and partnered with a bunch of people, but how does each one of those people that you've carefully selected and chosen to make part of your company, give them options, pay them whatever, why'd you pick them, and how are they adding value to your ultimate story? That's what's important, and for gosh sakes, please highlight them when you tell that story.
Would any of the other panelists like to add something to that?
I think that's very insightful about when you're pitching with these decks. I think once you get out into the world and you're really commercializing your products, I think there are so many ways, and Laura could speak to this as well, but so many ways to highlight those KOLs and their knowledge and their experience with your products. You can do it at podium, you can do it through PR placements and PR interviews. You can do it through webinars like we're doing today. There are just so many ways, live events where you have, events where they can network with those people and really ask pointed questions. And so there are a lot of ways to really highlight that customer advocacy or KOL program that you're running. It's just a matter of focusing on one at a time to make sure you're doing a good job with each one, and then move on to the next really way to promote them. I know, Laura, you work a lot with KOLs. I'll bet you have.
Yeah, we do. I mean, it's really critical because it's one thing to tell a journalist, like, we have the best thing since, sliced bread, but, that's the company saying it. And so, of course, you're going to say that. So they, by definition, especially national reporters, you could provide your KOL, but you know what? Somebody from the Wall Street Journal will just start randomly calling people he knows, so you might have another doctor that weighs in because they want to have some friction in the story always. And, they know that we're handing them a KOL. So it's very important for credibility in this market to have those voices in your narrative. Definitely.
I love to sorry if I interrupted, to dovetail just on that. There's you tell the story to whomever, you've got a KOL telling that story, which adds exponential credibility, but they're also sometimes hired guns, which is part of the game.
Yeah.
It is also great to have in your back pocket objective market research, and it doesn't necessarily have to cost a lot of money, but if you know that whoever you're talking to is probably going to call some random people, that was what I was taking off on. You probably should have called some random people too that have no incentive to tell you what you want to hear, and have some objective data in your back pocket to say, not only do we have this panel of clinical advisors that are the best in the world, but we asked 100 surgeons in this category, and here's how many love it and how often they're going to use it, right? That is another layer of objectivity of people that have no incentive but to do the right thing. And I would encourage everybody to do that, and it is not necessarily as expensive as you think.
Great point.
Great point. And I might kind of just stay on that point a little bit longer. We talked about key opinion leaders. An adjacency to them is patient advocacy groups. they're another constituency. And so my question for you is, can you think of an organization that has leveraged collaboration with patient advocacy groups really well? Key opinion leaders are people you can get on your advisory board. It is different to work with patient advocacy groups. It's different to work with legislators. I'd be curious to hear if you've seen, if you've got examples, or if you've seen that executed well. And no is a fine answer. It is tricky, especially early stage.
I can speak to that actually, because we have a client that's currently doing that. So this client is called Delphinus Medical Technologies. They're out of Detroit, and they have a FDA approved, a PMA approval for, it's called SoftView, and it's basically a 3D whole breast ultrasound that's specifically geared towards finding cancer in dense breasts, because on mammography, cancer and dense breast tissue look the same. So, and 40% of women have dense breasts, and those who do are 4 to 6 times more likely to have cancer. So there's infinite number of advocacy groups. One is called Are You Dense? That was started by a woman who has passed away from the heart trauma of the chemo, but she found out she had a clean mammogram, and then a couple of weeks later found out she was like stage 3 or some crazy thing. And it was because the mammography didn't find dense breasts. And Katie Couric actually just had that experience. She announced it yesterday. And the problem with traditional ultrasound is that it's uncomfortable, number one, but number two, it's not, the sensitivity is not there. There's a lot of false callbacks and needless biopsies and those kinds of things. And so this system was developed to it not only measures reflection, which is what ultrasound measures, but it measures sound speed and attenuation going through the breast. And not only that, it's very comfortable. You're lying on a table and the transducer's under the table, and your breast is in a warm water bath. And I'm telling you too much story, but it's a game-changing technology. And so they are currently working with all of the advocacy groups that are in this space to get the word out. And these are very, very passionate groups, because, this is a kind of a life and death issue that women, a lot of them don't know about. And for those on the call who are women who have had mammograms and have gotten the letter that says, you have dense breast tissue, what happens after that entirely depends where you live. So Katie Couric got ultrasound that same day. I admit I have dense breasts, and I had to fight like everything to get an ultrasound and MRI at Hoag. And it's only because I know this issue exists, So it's really important to get these women's groups in to just really, raise hell that they want better screening. Sorry, that was probably longer than you asked for, but it's very relevant.
Really appreciate the story, and I happen to actually know the company, and so that's always fun to connect the dots. I think one of the things that this kind of tees up, and it ties to a couple of times when we've already touched on it in this conversation, earned media. Earned media is in many ways the holy grail for a lot of our startups. How do I get somebody to care about my company, about what I'm trying to do? And so we just spoke about advocacy groups. How does one do it? And I know that there is not an easy and trivial answer to it. Otherwise, everybody would already be very successful at it. But that is one of the trickier questions. And Laura, I'll ask you first, because that is in many ways your bread and butter as a PR agency. But I'm curious to hear examples from the other panelists if you've managed well, and what are some learnings from it?
Right. Yeah, I would say, and we've heard the word storytelling a lot on this call, and that's just really important when you're dealing with journalists, because you're trying to sell them your story, right? It's like a sales job. So, you're not, and it's about building relationships too, right? So you're not going to get the Wall Street Journal like 1 week into your PR campaign, especially if you're pre-commercial, but it's understanding what journalists are really looking for. And trying to, tease out different angles, different story angles. And there's a construct developed by Gannett that's still sort of relevant today, that what makes up good news. And it's 4 pieces. It's what's the news, like what's breaking, why should I care? What's the context? What problem is this solving? What's the impact? How many patients are we talking about? How many dollars are we saving? All the numbers. And then there's the human face to the story, which is oftentimes the patient, certainly the doctors as well. So you've got those 4 pieces, to kind of look at, how you're going to offer up your story to the journalist. So number one, you have to have people that know how to sell these stories in. And you have to understand too, and people know this, that earned media is not advertising, it's not guaranteed. But if you have the right team who really understand what reporters are looking for, on the national level, the trades are easier, but on a national level, these journalists are writing 7 stories a day. They're very, very busy. Plus they're all working from home now, which complicates things. But, thinking back on some of the things we did with Viz, we got a journalist at the Wall Street Journal interested in a story, and it was all about getting everything to him as fast as possible. So you really have to work with the journalist, and, and it's at the early stage, I think PR is really terrific because you guys, as I said, are all hitting milestones, and those are infinitely announceable, and you get people on, you get on the radar. They see you're having momentum. The trades will pick things up first, of course. So really start there. But I think earned media is really it's not a silver bullet. I mean, I think that once you get closer to commercialization, that's not going to get you all the way, but it's a critical component, I think, in the communication program.
Absolutely. I think, and I also think just from, thinking about all the different areas of marketing that you cover as a CMO, this is the hardest, in my opinion. It really is one of the hardest things to do. It's not a given that you're going to be in the Wall Street Journal or Forbes or even the trades. To Laura's point, you have to hire either a really good person in-house, or even better, somebody who has relationships across the board, all different kind of publications. And that's like a PR company like Laura's, and really a company that understands your market and the problems in your market, who are going to be value add when it comes to telling the story are essential. And so to me, I would think of this one as really essential. And I do think it is the holy grail, but it's the hardest part, in my opinion, of marketing.
Well, and I think, just to throw this out there, because I think there was a question about how do you operate in this regulatory environment. When I started when I got out of tech, I was at an agency that was just healthcare, and I was running the HIT practice. And then I learned about medtech, medical devices, and I fell in love. But I remember like a week into it, I'm like, a 510K, what's that? Like PMA, IDE, what are all these things, And so now we're all steeped in it. We know like the wiggle words you can use, what you can and can't say, what to do and not do to tick off the FDA. So it's important to make sure that whoever's communicating on your behalf really understands that. And that any public facing materials from a PR standpoint are vetted by your regulatory and legal. So I'm sure all of you know that, but it's an important distinction because like I said, that we're not selling shampoo, we're not selling video games, we're selling regulated products. And so you have to be very smart about how you do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, whatever you say to media, whatever form could last forever. And you have to assume that the most problematic person that will ever read it is going to read it next, right? Like the FDA, et cetera. Never let anyone from your company in front of media of any sort without being prepared. So I'm going to give a couple basic questions. One, are you great at telling your story? I would say most companies are okay at it, not great. Number 2, you might be great at it. Have you had formal media training? And number 3, is someone on your team proactively driving that and continuing to monitor, as Laura just said, the messaging? Do you have a copy approval process? Or are you just talking to people that happen to knock on your door, you find an opportunity? Every one of those opportunities you need to be prepared for. And I'm not incentivized to say, work with any PR companies or marketing relations companies, but I would say get help and get help early. And if there's any one of those questions, if you're not sure you're great at telling your story to media, you haven't had media training, you don't have someone vetting what you're saying externally, get help.
Yeah. And I would say too, that it's interesting because this oftentimes happens where when you're new to media relations, you think you're just talking to a friend. And there are techniques they use, right, to get you to say things you might not otherwise wanted to say. And you have to know that you're always on the record. So it's a performance, really. It's not just a conversation. So it's, I agree with Nick. I think that it's really important to have some understanding of media training before you get out there, even with the trades.
Yeah, I think that's a really key, somebody to outsource, so you have that expertise, so that sounding board on your team.
There's two things in the stream that I'd like to come back to. One is the in-house versus external, and the other I'll come to first is Laura. I believe it was you who used the word wriggle words. It could have been Nick. I didn't write it.
Yeah.
So I think it's in a highly regulated space. It is really tricky which words we use, and that ties us straight back to branding. And one of the questions that one of our companies just asked in the Q&A is to learn a little bit more about branding a trial. How do we brand a trial? I'll ask you first, Bill.
Well, it's like branding anything else. You start with the basics. You know, who is this for, the positioning, etc. But you know, there are obviously there are multiple target audiences for clinical trial branding. The media and the investment world is certainly a big one, but it's patients. You're trying to recruit, and then there's physicians who are potentially going to be looking at your solution down the road. So there are multiple target audiences for clinical trial branding. The rules behind the naming of trials isn't the same as most other medical devices and so forth. You can say things that are a bit more of a claim and a bit more ephemeral, if you will, with your trial name. There's also not the issues around trademark infringement are also not quite there either. So it's a funny area. But the bottom line is what you're trying to do is not just name it, but brand it. So you're trying to get across more attributes about what you're doing than just a name would do. You're trying to communicate more about what the potential outcome is going to be, what the emotional benefits are going to be. And you'll do that both through a name, through a tagline, and then through some kind of a visual branding, whether it's a logo type or a logo, but the visual branding also. So, again, I think the biggest difference is there's multiple target audiences for that clinical trial brand, and they're very diverse. So that's what you have to deal with is that diversity.
I appreciate that. I'd like to come back to the in-house versus outsourcing question. And so as we were talking about earned media and that the effort it can take, that sure sounds like a full-time job. Do I have to have somebody in-house? Should I outsource some of that? Perhaps I'll start with Kelly, because you've been in the trenches in-house. Where's the line between what to do in-house and what to outsource?
Yeah, I mean, I've done various things. I mean, I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's always been extremely helpful and valuable to outsource the PR aspect of marketing. They're just become an extension of your team. And then another area that I think about outsourcing is if you're going to be doing any digital marketing, and you're going to be doing any paid ads or anything on LinkedIn, those kind of things. Those are a constant something somebody has to do and watch all the time, or have the tools to watch all the time. And so to me, that makes sense as well. But I think the in-house team and brand as well as Bill, that's always great to get somebody to sort of be your sounding board, work with you, so you're not doing something in a vacuum from a brand perspective. So they may not be, they may be an engagement that's, for one big project like the brand, the naming, all of those things, or research. But but really the in-house team is invaluable because they're so close to your brand, your culture, your story. They can really just tell it, and it becomes a little bit of a familiarity thing that in-house works for most of marketing.
Laura, you are the person that lots of companies outsource some of the work to. How do you best work with a company? What should they be doing in-house, and what should they be working with you on?
Yeah, it really depends on the company and the stage where the company is. So, for example, we're talking to a company in a consumer-related device, a stimulation device for pain, anxiety, depression, and sleep, and they want to outsource marketing because they're so focused on what they need to do from the business objective standpoint that they don't have the capacity in-house to do that. Now that's rare, but that's where we have the most fun, frankly, because you feel like you're part of the team. But I think Kelly said, it best is if we work best when we feel like we're part of the team, because the more we know about what's going on internally with our clients, the more we can figure out, ideas for getting them, awareness, or, generating story ideas or campaigns or things like that. It's very important to work very closely with the team and not kind of find out things last minute and then have to scurry and try to do the best with what you have. But I think, from an outsourcing standpoint, what I've seen is, again, if it distracts from the business, if you're trying to do social media or content writing or whatever, and you don't really have domain expertise in that anyway in-house, those are the kinds of situations where you would see somebody looking to outsource. And then as they grow, as our clients grow, a lot of times that they build their in-house capability, but along the way that we're augmenting that work as they're building out.
Yeah, I think it's just different companies seem to have different preferences for outsourcing versus an in-house team.
Yeah,
on that from place to place.
Nick, as an investor, the company might be spending your money on outsourcing some of their storytelling. What would you advise a company on how to vet consultants? How do I figure out who's doing a good job?
Right. There are a lot of consulting firms out there for PR, investor relations. Number one, do they work with companies like us? Do they have a history of success with companies like us? Right. There's some huge media houses that would never focus on a startup. Right. So do they have experience in my space? Do they have experience with companies of my size? And can they grow with me as my needs change? And has anybody else that you know of worked with them? Is there some reference point that you can get to just you check the background and the history of working with those companies? There are lots of companies out there that are willing to take your money. I think, number one, realize when you need it. And I would say earlier versus later. And as an investor, I'm constantly trying to get CEOs to get more help early. And usually it's too late and you're playing catch up. But I think it's pretty basic, like dealing with any vendor. Are they experienced in your space? Do they focus on companies of your size? And can you get some references of history of success with companies similar to you?
Great. We've got another question from LinkedIn that really speaks to even some of our cohort. If you're a company trying to break into the US market, you're somewhere else in the world, how you're fighting a little bit more of an uphill battle to get noticed by investors, to get noticed by patients. Where do you start? Small business development team, where do you start getting attention in the US market?
Well, I sit on the board of a number of startup medtech companies outside of the United States. First I start with you'll find a whole bunch of people that are going to raise their hand and want to help you. What I would say is you should have a regular appearance in the United States at the meetings where other folks are attending. Medtech Innovator, LSI Emerging MedTech Summit, whatever big, scientific congress. So are you going to the key scientific congresses? Are you going to the investor meetings where you're going to meet people in the ecosystem, build your network, and find out who are the people that are consistently helping companies like mine, and who are just out of the blue, trying to solicit my business? So I would tell all companies outside the United States, there are a lot of people that you'll meet, virtually. I would get there live, meet people face to face, understand the network that you're really working in, and get some, recommendations from, people that live. And, that always makes such a huge difference. But if you're not in the investor conferences, there's the key scientific meetings, then it's always going to be secondhand, and you're always going to be playing catch up.
Anything to add?
We've worked with several and continue to work with several companies in Europe and Israel. And, they really have to do their part of what Nick was just saying, being at the conferences, that kind of thing. But, we've had success introducing them into US markets just by doing what we do in terms of communicating their milestones, kind of building the case for their product or technology or whatever the problem is they're trying to solve. And still going out to those outlets that the investors and strategics read, and certainly the trades for whatever clinical segment they're trying to get in. But they have to do their job of, circulating in the ecosystem and also obviously hitting their milestones so that we've got something positive to communicate.
Yeah, I think that lends to the overall credibility in the US, the live in person.
Mm-hmm.
I am wondering, especially with the credibility, what are the platforms, what are the tools that are most reputable for different products? We often see different avenues of getting the message out. And so medical devices are, as we already said, quite different from consumer packaged goods. So really, what are the platforms that you mostly see? We're streaming today on YouTube and on LinkedIn, as well as on a Zoom meeting. But by the same token, social media, are there areas that you use more or less? What are the most important marketing platforms and tools that you see startups use successfully?
I guess, would you clarify that, Diane? Are you talking about MarTech platforms, or are you talking about communication platforms like the LinkedIns of the world?
Perhaps I'll broaden it to both. I was firstly talking about communication platforms. So, should I look at TikTok? Should I have a presence, or should I be on Instagram or not? But I'd be interested in your opinion about marketing tools as well.
Okay. Yeah, to me, I think the essentials are the LinkedIn and the YouTubes. There are, depending on your audience that you're going to, there are scientific journals that will become very important over time. And then they all have their conferences like we've talked about. And then I think from those are the most important. I think LinkedIn is really can be impactful, and you can do a lot with LinkedIn. From a paid perspective, but also from an organic perspective in building your audience and sharing the news. Twitter is very popular too, and WhatsApp groups. If you're going after, clinicians, but if you're going after pharma companies or med device companies, that's a little bit different.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that like everything we've talked about here, answering the question, should I be on TikTok or Instagram? It really depends what your offering is. And, it's really company specific. But I remember back in the day when Facebook was first, getting going, and all of the boards wanted every company to have Facebook pages. And it made no sense to me, but it was like the shiny apple at the time. It was like everyone wanted to be on Oprah back in the day. You need to be strategic about how you're going to use it. But I agree with Kelly. Like, I think it's very, there was a question about how can you do cost-effective social media campaigns? They don't have to cost as much as you think, because you can do very, very, very good targeting. You can test different things. So it's really company specific, but I think there's a huge opportunity in social media in general.
I appreciate those answers. Time has flown. We are right on top of the hour. I'd like to kind of make sure I give each of you an opportunity to leave folks with a thought as to really what are some challenges and pitfalls to avoid at the early stages of a company before we bid our LinkedIn and YouTube audience goodbye. Happy to have any of you jump in with what is a take-home message you want everyone on this live stream to remember.
To me, I think the most important thing is know your audience and know them very, very well. Your audience meaning the buyers of your product, the investors in your product, and your employees too, because that culture and that internal brand is so important as you start scaling. But to me, that's the foundation of everything.
I agree with that. I think that, oftentimes we're so in love with our own products that we think everyone's gonna, adopt right away, but we haven't done our homework and it's harder than you think. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, know what you want to say and how you want to deliver that. And if you don't have a plan of what you're going to say and exactly how you're going to deliver that based on the stage of your company, get help early. And
also keep in mind that where you are right now is not where you're going to be a year or 2 or 4 years from now, and make sure that you're leaving yourself some wiggle room to grow your brand and expand over time. And that's with not only your strategy, but it's with all the words that you use. And
Fantastic. Really appreciate that. We're going to conclude the live streaming. Thank you to our panelists, and we'll move straight into Q&A with the companies. And if you've watched us on live stream, check out the 1-minute company videos. They're amazing. They're up now. The competition is live. And come back next week when we're talking about